If one believes that there is life after death, that there is a heaven, and more to life than earthly existence, and that there is a God, then it is imperative for them to realize that this is only possible through, with, and in Jesus, who declared himself the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus explains what this means in today's gospel as he teaches, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it." These words of Jesus are in stark contrast with our fallen, ego-driven human nature and many of the societal and cultural trends in our world today. Jesus has always been countercultural. Our first reading from Isaiah is a prophecy that will be fulfilled in Jesus' own passion, crucifixion, and death, which Jesus reveals to his disciples, a reality that they do not want to hear, especially Peter, who had just testified that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Peter and his fellow apostles are stung at what Jesus said. It was really too much for them to comprehend. Is this really what it means to be a disciple of Jesus? To deny oneself, take up one's cross, and follow to the cross? Who of us wants to suffer? Who of us wants to embrace and carry a cross, a heavy burden of one kind or another? Our crosses come in so many various and different ways: psychological, emotional, physical, cultural, etc. So often we fight against and chafe at having to bear whatever cross it may be. Some crosses are visible, others invisible. And the way of the cross can seem unbearable day by day. It can crush an individual, or it can lead to glory. The glory is the invitation to discipleship in and through the cross of Jesus. Tonight I want to share an article written about a man who daily carries a heavy burden with incredible joy. He is a man who seeks to embody the teaching of St. James from our second reading today, putting faith into work. Mainstream media mostly ignore him unless there's some statement that is often misrepresented. He is a man who walks in the footsteps of St. Peter. The Catholic Church prays for him at every Mass that he be guided by the Holy Spirit to shepherd the Church. I quote, "At the end of Pope Francis's longest apostolic journey, which took him to Asia and Oceania, there are several images destined to remain in the mind and heart. The first is that of the tunnel of fraternity that the Pope blessed alongside the Grand Imam of Jakarta. At a time when tunnels are associated with images of war, terrorism, violence, and death, This underground walkway connecting Indonesia's largest mosque to the Catholic cathedral is a sign and a seed of hope. The gestures of friendship and affection exchanged by the Bishop of Rome and the Grand Imam touch many in the world's most populous Muslim country. The second image is that of Pope Francis boarding the Australian Air Force C-130 to travel to Vanimo in the northwest of Papua New Guinea to visit 3 Argentinian missionaries and their people, bringing with him a ton of aid and gifts. Pope Francis, who as a young man had dreamed of becoming a missionary to Japan, had long wanted to make this visit to the most remote periphery of the world, where he was embraced by men and women in their colorful traditional attire. Being a missionary means, first of all, sharing the lives, the many problems, the hopes of these people living in precarious conditions, immersed in exuberant nature. It means witnessing to the face of a God who is filled with tenderness and compassion. The third image is that of President José Manuel Ramos Horta, who, at the conclusion of the official speeches at the presidential palace in Dili, Timor-Leste, bent down to help the Pope adjust his feet on the wheelchair pedals. In the most Catholic country in the world, faith is a strongly defining element, and the role of the Church was decisive in the process that led to independence from Indonesia. How many of us know any of this history? I certainly did not before the Pope's pilgrimage. Go back to the article. The fourth image is the moving embrace of the Pope with the children with disabilities who are cared for by the sisters of the Imaras Almas school. He exchanged gestures, looks, and a few words that were deeply evangelical to remind us that these children who rely on others for everything by allowing themselves to be cared for teach us to allow ourselves to be cared for by God. The question of why these children suffer is a blade that cuts deep, a sword that does not heal. Pope Francis's response to this mystery was closeness and a fatherly embrace of love. The fifth image is that of the people of Timor-Leste, who waited for hours under the scorching sun for the Pope on the Taki Tuli plain. More than 600,000 people were present, practically 1 out of every 2 citizens. Pope Francis was moved by this reception and warmth in a country that, after hard-won independence from Indonesia, is slowly building its future. 65% of the population is under 30 years old, and the roads traveled by the Pope Mobile were overflowing with young men and women with their very small children. This experience was a sign of hope for the Church, hope for the world. Timor-Leste, a small island of about 1.2 million people, is 97% Catholic. The sixth image is that of Singapore's skyline, the island state with its towering, ultra-modern skyscrapers. This is a developed and wealthy country. It's impossible not to think of the contrast with the dusty streets of Dili, which the Pope had just left a few hours earlier. Even here, where wealth is evident on every corner, where life is organized and transportation is incredibly fast, Pope Francis embraced everyone and pointed to the path of love, harmony, and fraternity. Finally, the last image is that of the Pope himself. Some had doubted whether he could withstand the strain of such a long journey of almost 2 weeks in countries with tropical climates. On the contrary, it was an upward journey. Instead of tiring day by day, covering kilometers, transfers, and flights, he gained energy. He met the young people of various countries, abandoning his written text and exchanging in dialogue with them, refreshing his spirit and body and giving them hope for the future. He became young among the young, despite his approaching 88th birthday, which he will celebrate on the eve of the 2025 Jubilee year. Pope Francis, like so many of his predecessors, truly understands these words of Christ. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Let us follow his example. Let us not be afraid to lose our lives in serving others so that we may find them and find Jesus himself.
So in our gospel today, we have this interesting turnaround of the interaction with Peter and Jesus. So Peter tells Jesus that he believes that they believe he is the Christ. And then Jesus goes on to start explaining to them what it means for him to be the Christ, which doesn't quite line up with what Peter and the Jewish people at the time thought the Messiah was going to be. Started telling him about the fact that he was going to have to suffer and die. And Peter's like, no, Lord, that can't be right. And Jesus tells him, get behind me, Satan. Those are pretty strong words coming from Jesus. But he's speaking to the truth that wasn't what needed to happen. Peter wasn't thinking, as Jesus says, with the mind of God. God knew that this is what needed to happen to reconcile us to him. But it also reminds us that there's a very big misconception that following God and Jesus means everything's going to be perfect. I'm not going to have any problems in my life. No issues will come up. Everybody's going to be happy all the time. No arguments with my family. Everybody's going to love me and like what I'm doing because I'm me. Not so much. He literally says, take up your cross and follow me. And when you're carrying your cross, you're going on your way to crucifixion. What Jesus promises is to be present, to be with us through our trials, to be with us through our times of turbulence and need. And he teaches us that he can bring good out of those moments in our lives, that those moments of trial and suffering can be a moment of change in our lives, a moment of bringing about good. Even though it's not necessarily something he wants us to go through, he can make it happen for his glory, change it. Just give a quick example from my own life. When I was in about 5th through 9th grade, I had no friends. The people who sat in a circle see me coming and close the group so I couldn't join them. I was spat upon twice just for the entertainment of my classmates. just was not a very good time in my life. But it has given me a heart for those on the outskirts, for those who aren't accepted by others. And that's how God took that horrible time of suffering in my life and turned it for good. Because I know what it's like to be that person, I have a better heart for the people who are in that position. That's how our suffering can lead to good. If we allow God into those moments of challenge in our life. But we have to allow God in. We have to let him to work with us and walk with us and realize that walking with Christ means that even as we're suffering, we're in peace because we know he's with us and because we know this journey on earth isn't our end point. Heaven is. We have peace because we know that no matter what suffering or pain comes in this life, we're going to a place that's way better. So much better. That's why Jesus says that anyone who loses their life for me will gain it. So let us look at our lives and see, especially look back and see those moments of suffering that we had in the past. See if we can see where Christ put people in our life and where God was present to us, and we may not even realize it at the moment. Because it's a lot easier to look back and see it after you've gone through it than as you're going through it. But I promise you, God was there with you. You may have to pray about it a little bit, but if you look back with the eyes of God, with the help of God, you'll see you weren't alone in those times of trial. And knowing that will give you help and peace, knowing that he's with you in the trials you have now or in the future. So let us look and see, what trials do we need to trust that God has seen us through? What moments in our life do we need to trust that God has us in his hands, that we can bear all things with him and ask him for his help? And remember, you have all of us here as well. You're not alone. That's why we have our faith community. So let us trust that by going through these times of trials, God will bring good. God loves us, wants to be with us, and have that peace knowing that this isn't our final destination.